I think maybe 2 years into like having the band, we released an album, we were gigging, we even played some festivals, and we had maybe 300 people on our mailing list. I mean, we were failing in marketing the band, and the product itself was good. It was solid. And again, like we spent nearly $30,000 on different services. They sucked. Like you don't get any ROI. So we were bummed, and we decided to go for the weekend to San Diego. Basically stuck in traffic. And I remember I asked Joey, "Is like, dude, how is it possible that during your day job you're selling everything very successfully online? Like, at the time he was managing like a big company, like generating millions of dollars in like doing marketing stuff, and yet like we're totally failing promoting our band." But in 2008, everyone was tuning into Pandora. And then we're like, okay, well, what's the business model of Pandora and other online services? They're using music to sell ads and commercials for like things you don't care about. And then we thought about another business model, which is Google AdWords, where like small businesses, they can buy like exposure in certain areas. Why don't we like put the two together, create like an online radio that will allow bands and record labels to basically bid to get airtime, and instead of using their music to try to sell ads, we'll use it to sell the band, their upcoming concerts, merchandise, whatever. By the time we got to San Diego, we were like on fire.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the MO Podcast. I'm your host, Joey Flores, here with my co-host, Jonathan T.D. And today we have a special guest, my good friend and former business partner, Yotam Rosenbaum. Yotam is an incredible musician who graduated magna cum laude from Berklee College of Music before moving to Los Angeles to launch his music production company. I met Yotam around 2005 when he became my drum instructor, and eventually he and I formed an eclectic 10-piece band. In 2010, based on our collective frustration with the marketing tools available for musicians, we founded Earbits, a streaming music service designed to help artists tap into new audiences and turn them into fans and customers. We built that business until it was acquired in 2015. Since then, Yotam has become a startup guru, leading accelerator programs in Australia, and more recently running an investment fund exclusively focused on Y Combinator-backed companies. Yotam, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, we're pleased to have you. This is going to be a little bit different interview than normal because I know most of Yotam's stories from our Earbits days. And so, it would feel a little strange asking the questions. So I'm going to let Jonathan ask quite a lot of the questions, and I will dive in sometimes with my own thoughts. And I have some of my own questions for Yotam as well. So I will otherwise let Jonathan take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Joey. Yotam, good to see you. Thanks for taking part in our podcast here. I've heard a number of stories about Earbits and your adventures over the years from Joey, but since he's a highly unreliable narrator, I'm very happy to have you on and on the record here. So that's going to be a good record-setting opportunity. But maybe just to start, why don't tell us a story about how you and Joey first met before you even started Earbits, and what were the circumstances around your meeting and first becoming acquainted and then friends?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember it vividly. I just moved to Los Angeles. It was 2005. No job prospect, no friends, just me, my drum set, and a couple of bags. And I started doing what musicians do, which is looking for work. So I posted an ad on Craigslist offering drum lessons. And first phone call was from Joey. So we arranged a time to set up a lesson, and he showed up to my studio. And I remember, so he had like long dreadlocks, and I remember looking at him like, is this guy homeless? So that was the first encounter. We quickly realized that we share the same type of sense of humor, and just quickly became good friends, and one thing led to another. From drum lessons, we became roommates, from roommates, bandmates, and finally business partners.
Yeah, so tell me, what was the band that you all began, and at what point? Because Joey has often described himself as not having very much musical talent. So I'm curious about when, as a graduate of the Berklee College of Music and someone who plays a number of instruments with some musical background, you decided that Joey would be a good bandmate.
Yeah, so we were having a drum lesson, and then he mentioned that he writes lyrics and that he raps and that he just like won or nearly won some some spoken word competition in LA. I was like, okay, let's hear it. So he like did like one of his poems, and I was really impressed. And a part of writing good lyrics, he is also very persistent. And then he said, dude, we should put a band together. And after the 50th time he said that, because my thing was like, yeah, like we can put a band together. I was a bit jaded about trying to promote a band because I've done it before. I knew how difficult it is. So part of his pitch was like, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, let's put the band together. I'm like, marketing is my thing. I will be in charge of marketing the band. So yeah, it sounded fun, and we didn't like have really a plan in mind, but like it kind of like grew organically from like just a regular band into like a 10-piece funk jazz hip hop group. It was a lot of fun. We had amazing musicians from LA, studio musicians, and yeah, ended up producing an album and trying to promote the album and spending lots of Joey's money on services that sucked. And that was the evolution of coming, like the idea of Earbits. It really came completely from our own frustration.
I still remember, so the first time that we sat down in Yotam's home studio because we used to do drum lessons at like a rented studio, but we went to Yotam's house to work on our first song. And, he was using MIDI and writing some horn pieces. And he was like, how many people do we want to be in this band? And he had already told me he didn't want to like form a band of just a bunch of people who were going to come together at their convenience and practice because they, loved it. He's like, I've done it. It's going to be impossible. Like, I want to hire people, really good people to play with us. It'll be your band and my band, and we'll have final say on the music and all of the business decisions, and we'll just pay professionals to be our backing band. He's like, I don't trying to like get a bunch of people in LA to meet at a rehearsal studio if you're not paying them is just going to be a losing thing. So we're writing the first song, and he goes, how many people should we have in the band? And I was like, I don't know. How many do you think? And he's like, because I'm really hearing a vibraphone right now. But if we had a vibraphone player, it's like a whole new thing. It's like, it's a big instrument. It doesn't fit on certain stages, like, whatever. I was like, dude, whatever you're hearing, I mean, let's just do it. And like, literally, we ended up with a 10-piece band.
And a vibraphone.
What's the going rate for a vibraphone player in Los Angeles, circa?
Well, that's the good thing about jazz musicians.
They work pretty cheaply, right?
Phenomenal musicians for affordable price. Yes,
it was $100 a player for one rehearsal and the show. Luckily, they were such incredible players. We only needed one rehearsal. I always wished we had more rehearsals because I needed it. But the other guys would show up. Yotam would hand them the sheet music. They would look at it for a few minutes and then just hammer out the rehearsal and show up to the gig ready to go. So like just completely professional musicians. Like, this was
sometimes people ask me if my background in music prepared me for running a startup. And I think scheduling a rehearsal with 10 musicians, yes, in terms of like operations, that definitely prepared me for for running a startup. It's really
right. That's like startup HR, managerial environment right there.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so, what was the moment for you that really distilled the frustration with the marketing of the band and that transitioned over to saying, listen, we have to build something ourselves if we're gonna have a platform that's gonna do this kind of thing? Was there a sort of salient moment or a kind of aha, or a chucking a laptop across the room, or getting angry at something that was the impetus for you? You're like, okay, this makes sense. We got to do something different.
Yeah. So again, remember that very vividly. That was, I think, maybe 2 years into like having the band. We released an album. We were gigging. We even played some festivals, and we had maybe 300 people on our mailing list. I mean, we were failing in marketing the band, and the product itself was good. It was solid. And again, like we spent nearly $30,000 on different services. They suck. Like you don't get any ROI. You don't even get any visibility into what happened to your money. It's just like empty promises of like, yeah, we're gonna get you exposure. So we were bummed, and we decided to go for the weekend to San Diego. We were living in LA at the time. Got on the 405 at 4 p.m. on a Friday. You know how that looks. Basically stuck in traffic. We're bummed. And then I remember I asked Joey, it's like, dude, how is it possible that during your day job, you're selling everything very successfully online? At the time he was managing the big company, generating millions of dollars in doing marketing stuff. And yet we're totally failing promoting our band. And we started talking about the problem that we're facing, and quickly realized that the best way to market music is the radio. And historically, the radio was terrestrial radio. You can only fit, very small number of songs per hour. But in 2008, everyone was tuning into Pandora. It was exploding. And all of a sudden you have online radio, which you can fit infinite number of songs. And not only that, you can customize it to the likes of the listener. And then we're like, okay, well, what's the business model of Pandora and other online services? They're using music to sell ads and commercials for things you don't care about. It's annoying to the listener. There's no value to the band from that. And then we thought about another business model, which is Google AdWords, where small businesses, even if they have a $5 budget, they can buy exposure in certain areas. And they were like, well, hang on, why don't we put the two together, create an online radio that will allow bands and record labels to basically bid to get airtime. And instead of using their music to try to sell ads, we'll use it to sell the band, their upcoming concerts, merchandise, whatever. By the time we got to San Diego, we were on fire. Oh my God, this is the best thing. It's just we're so excited about the idea. We talked about it the whole weekend. We came back to LA. We continued talking about it. We ended up talking about the idea for 2 years. I had no intention whatsoever to do anything about it. I was a full-time musician. I knew nothing about startups. The idea was exciting. Everyone we shared the idea with said, yeah, you should build it. Bands said, yeah, I'll pay for this kind of service. Investors said, yeah, it's a smart idea. You should do something about it. And then finally, after 2 years of just talking about it, in 2010, I think both Joey and I were in kind of crossroads in terms of our careers. I was getting a little burned out of jumping from one gig to another. And Joey was pretty sick and tired with his corporate job. And we're like, well, how long are we going to continue ignoring this idea? And we're like, oh, well, let's give it a chance. Let's see what happens. And yeah, so we started the company, and then one thing led to another.
What was the first move that you made in terms of that was concretely starting the company?
That's a good question. Joey, what do you think was that?
I think we did a few things. We came up with a name, which eventually our lawyer insisted we change because it was too similar to an actual radio station in Los Angeles. And we launched a blog where we started talking about what we were planning to do, and we also started reviewing other services for musicians, which turned out to be really good SEO content later down the road. I mean, I remember posts that we wrote in the earliest days ended up being major drivers of band acquisition for us later on, once they had kind of been, around for a while. And then Yotam started reaching out to artists that he knew and saying, hey, we're building this radio platform. Can we use your music? And the ones who were in a position to let us use their music said, sure. And some of them said, I'm not allowed to give you my music for this type of thing, but my label could. And then they started putting us in touch with labels, and labels just started shipping us boxes of CDs to our house, basically saying yeah, I mean, whatever you can do to get my artists on the radio, I'm in. And so at first we really thought it was going to be an indie band sort of thing at the beginning. But right away, labels were very interested in the idea and started sending us whole they'd be like, we have 80 musicians on our catalog and a total of 160 albums. And they would just send us a box with every CD from every band that they had. Yeah.
And so are you at that point then ripping the music from those CDs and putting them up into onto a hard drive? Yeah. Or I can't remember, at that point, you could put them up on the cloud, and then,
cloud, yes.
And so it's cloud, and then you had to. What was the first interface for the company? What did it look like to create?
So at that point, we're like, as we were building the catalog, we actually haven't launched yet. And for me, that was one of the aha moments of like, holy shit, we're onto something, because like these reputable like record labels are sending me boxes of CDs. We don't have a website. It's just based on the idea of a website. So yeah, at that point, we're just putting it on the cloud. And then we launched. How long did it take? Maybe 3 months or so to actually launch the first iteration, something like that?
Well, we started in like January of 2010, and then finally met a technologist, Benjamin Bryant, in May. I was at a networking event, and this guy came up and was like, "Hey, how's it going? Like, what are you working on?" And I explained the idea. He's like, "That sounds amazing. I want to build that for you guys." And so we started talking to him, and then we launched our first version of the platform in, I think, like September of 2010, and we had 8 channels of music. So they were really like broad channels, just like country, which you can break country down into an infinite number of subgenres, but it was just like country, jazz, hip hop, and whatever. And then we also, like, before that even launched, we managed to go out and get a website called Nashville.com to let us build a country music channel that they would co-brand on their site as Nashville.com country radio. And so, they had a massive amount of traffic. And so we had this whole idea originally of mostly just building affiliate stations for already high traffic websites. We didn't really intend early on to like build our own consumer destination. We just thought, oh, let's build a country music channel for Nashville. Later on, we built one for the San Francisco Chronicle that played only bands with upcoming live Bay Area performances, which was a super cool product. But it turned out that when people are going to those websites without the intention of listening to music, the conversion rates, the time spent.
They don't listen to music. Interesting.
It didn't work, but it was, like super cool, like niche products that I think were fun.
I think that was also the reason why we got accepted into YC. I'm pretty sure about that.
Oh, for sure. When we told Paul Graham that we had this Nashville.com deal, he was like, oh, wow. Like, you're just, first off, my background was in affiliate marketing. He's like, okay, so we got this affiliate marketing guy, and he's going out and closing these partnerships for affiliate radio stations on like already high traffic websites. As long as they don't have to build their own consumer destination, this looks really cool. And so we got in, and then both of these niche radio services we launched with these affiliate partners like didn't work. And we decided like, no, we have to build our own consumer destination, our own mobile apps. So we basically have to compete like head on with Pandora. And that's harder.
Yotam, from your side, what was the story behind applying to YC? What was the sort of stimulus for making that jump when it came along?
Yeah, so I think when we started the company, Joey basically did what Joey does best, and like within a few weeks, like educated himself like from A to Z about everything about startups, and through that experience also learned about Y Combinator. I think another thing that we did early on is that we put together a board of advisors of super smart people who could help us. One of them is a Vichel Garg, and he told us, hey guys, like you should apply for YC. But I think our response was, well, we're already like, we already launched the website. We're too far along for that. He said, why don't you apply? You get in, you can decide later. So we applied. I think the first time we applied, we didn't get an interview. And then the second time they invited us for an interview. So we talked to a few YC founders. And by the time we finished talking to these guys, we're like, holy shit, we need to get into YC. Like everyone we talked to was like, this was just like, it's a life-changing thing for your company and for them personally. So yeah, then we drove up to Menlo Park or wherever the office was, and had the interview, a 10-minute interview, and that was it. But yeah, I cannot take any credit for any of that, like Joey, really, in terms of like all the business decisions. It was Joey who drove all of that.
What, Yotam, for you, what do you think the most important thing was that you took away from YC after the 3 months that you worked on Earbits there?
Yeah, for me, it was really strange actually to be in that environment, because again, my background was so not relevant. Our cohort, we were, I think, 43 companies, a little more than 100 founders, predominantly male. I think there were like 3 girls in the cohort. They're all in their early 20s, graduates or dropouts from Stanford and Harvard. They all, to me, look very smart and like as if they know everything and I know nothing. So I felt completely like a fish out of water there. I'm used to hanging out with musicians. So it felt quite uncomfortable, I have to say, and also quite stressful because it's a 3-month thing that at the end of it, you get to demo day with the opportunity to pitch in front of the best investors, basically in the Valley. It's not an opportunity that you find anywhere else. So you feel the pressure to get stuff done and to, in a way, you are competing with the other companies in the batch. So it was pretty stressful, I would say. But I think what I took from it, a lot of the things I took from it actually took some time for me to process and realize in retrospect. And one of those things is the fact that like nobody actually knew what they're doing. Yes, it's a group of smart people, but I realized that I'm just as smart as the rest of the group. Maybe I'm not as good in math, but it's when you build a startup, it's not like the type of wisdom that you need is not just numbers. It's a lot of different things. And by definition, building a startup is all about like not knowing what exactly you're doing. It's all about like exploring and trying to figure things out. But yeah, at the time, it just felt like, oh man, like I just don't belong here.
So you raised money for Earbits, and then you get through YC. You've got the YC imprimatur. You've got money in the bank. And what was the first sort of major use of funds at that point to get the company?
I'm smiling
to the next
because
level?
the way you're describing it sounds so like easy and like, oh, yeah, you did this. You got the money in the bank. I wish that was the case. So we got to demo day. Joey did the pitch. It absolutely smashed it. It was pretty much voted best pitch of the night, despite the fact that Paul Graham tried to said that the order and the way that we approached it was not to his liking. We're like, whatever, like we're gonna do it our way. Pretty typical to our discussions with Paul Graham. And so that went really well, and we got like a lot of initial interest from people in the crowd and investors. However, raising money to begin with is not an easy thing. As you know, raising money for a music startup back in 2010 or 11 actually was insanely difficult. That's on the back of like a bunch of music startups that raised a lot of VC money, then got sued by record labels. All the money went into the record labels that sued them, and VCs got screwed. So lots of investors, like the minute they heard music, they're like, yeah, not interested, it's not for us. So I think on the back of demo day, we raised maybe 700K, which not bad, but we wanted to raise more like 2 million. And we ended up, or Joey ended up spending the following 2 years, I would say, basically continuing to raise like one check at a time, often driving all the way to San Francisco from LA for like a couple of meetings, hearing 2 no's, driving back to LA. And yeah, it was really, really difficult. And because of that, like, I think it was a huge distraction to begin with. And like Joey's time mostly went into fundraising instead of like, doing other things that would move the business. And also we felt like we always had to operate. We couldn't really do the stuff that we wanted to do. We couldn't hire the people. I guess, maybe it's unfair to say that because that's maybe the feeling that every startup has. Like no matter how much money you have, you always want to have, maybe more people and do more things. But it was really challenging. So with that introduction, now to answer your question, what did we do? We moved back to LA. We didn't take an office space or anything like that. We continued to operate from basically the garage. And we just continued, we basically hired a few more people and continued to build the platform. The main challenge, we had, 2 main challenges. One was to create a big catalog of music that would be high quality and of interest to our listeners. And the second was to get as many listeners as possible. So kind of like chicken and egg problem. If you don't have enough music, really difficult to get the listeners. If you don't have a ton of listeners, really difficult to convince high quality artists that they should participate.
Yeah. Joey, since that was more your area, I'm sort of curious. I don't think we've ever talked about this, but Was there an early strategy or an early sort of piece of the platform or that you built that, all of a sudden felt like it was going to turn on to creating new batch of listeners or to grow those listener numbers pretty quickly? Was there ever a sort of a dial or a switch that you flicked that you're like, oh, wait a second, like that really seems to be working, and then allowed you to kind of double down or focus on building the music catalog or something like that?
Yes, I'd say that moment came a little too late. But basically, first off, when we launched the company, even though maybe, the writing was theoretically on the wall, at that time, mobile music listening was not anywhere near as dominant as it is now. And so our first product was a website where you could go and listen to music, on your computer. And in retrospect, I think if I had to do it all over again, I don't know that we would even have built a regular website product. We probably would have launched with just an iOS and an Android app at the most, and just focused on like one or two of those platforms until we had hit a certain point. So unfortunately, we invested and then we had kind of sunk cost fallacy. So we chased the web product for too long. But I think that the funding that we did get allowed us to get enough developers to start building mobile apps, which was probably the first time that we really started doing that. But I didn't have the company I worked at before. I'd marketed a lot of products, but I had never actually built any products. And I didn't really understand the process of sort of customer development, interviewing customers, figuring out what they like and don't like about current solutions, like all of these things that nowadays, most startup founders read about and learn about. I don't think it was just so, it was not as obvious back then. And we didn't really do that. And at some point, somebody offered to introduce me to Mark Randolph, who was the founding CEO of Netflix. I was mostly just looking to pitch him on investing in the company. And Mark and I had a call, and he said, look, I don't think this is, a good investment for me, but there's actually lots and lots of similarities to early Netflix in what you're trying to do. And if you want to shoot on up to my place in Santa Cruz, I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about the business and see if I can be helpful. And I was like, that sounds amazing. So went up and met with Mark, and basically just taught me how to really truly think about setting KPIs. And, we sat in this conversation and really determined what was the most important metric to measure our product by. And we came up with, songs completed per user. So, not songs started, because if you skip songs, it's not a good experience. So basically it was the number of songs users listened to on a monthly basis. Was our way of measuring engagement, satisfaction, and all of these other things. And so he helped me set some really good KPIs. And then we went back to LA and started truly measuring those things and comparing the new features we launched to those metrics, and started really for the first time ever gaining. I mean, we had, millions of songs streaming every month. We had 300,000 registered listeners. I mean, we weren't, given that we didn't know how to do these things, we had some pretty good results. But, we were just not growing at the rate needed to raise venture capital. But we went back and started executing against those KPIs, and we're making some serious gains. And then unfortunately, we went into the holiday season when listening behaviors completely change, and people are more focused on shopping and things like that. And that shift in behavior really dirtied our data and made it really hard to make those same kind of decisions. And then, this was in 2013. And so when in 2014, once the holidays were over, the story of our improved growth and metrics just wasn't clear anymore. And so there just wasn't a very good story to tell about, how things were going on the consumer side of the business.
Yeah, it's amazing how much just a couple of months can screw up your ability to convince others that, the decisions that you have been making are the right decisions.
There was one thing that we did that was really interesting and curious at the same time. We introduced this thing that we called groovies, basically awarding the listener for taking actions that we want them to take. So if you marked a song or saved song or something like that, the actions that demonstrate that you care about the song or the band, you earn groovies. There was no value to the groovies at all. There's nothing you couldn't do with them. And then every once in a while, something in the database would get screwed up, and people would lose their groovies. And to our amazement, they will reach out and be hey, I lost all my groovies. It was really interesting to see how people cared about something that had no value whatsoever.
The original thought was to create a currency that you could earn by doing things that support the bands. And then you would have like greater flexibility. Like you could share more songs or listen to more, whatever. I mean, you could pretty much listen to whatever you wanted on our platform. That was one of the things, because we licensed the music directly from all the bands and labels. Our licensing agreement allowed us to do things that Pandora was not allowed to do, Spotify was not allowed to do, because they were mostly, well, at least Pandora was operating off of compulsory licenses that they didn't need to go sign deals, but they have very strict limitations. So we had a lot more flexibility, but the idea behind Groovies was that you could have even more flexibility if you did things that supported the musicians. And frankly, when we launched that service, this is one of the things we were measuring: the number of email mailing lists for the bands that users would sign up for went up by over 250%. So all of a sudden we launched Groovies, and bands were just getting all these people signing up for their mailing list to earn Groovies. And then, we had a band reach out to us and say, dude, this is crazy. We sent out a Kickstarter campaign to finance our next album, and somebody donated $500. We asked them how they heard about us, and they said they heard about us on Earbits, and they signed up for our mailing list because of Groovies. So interesting. It's like an early Web3 application, or like a early token that would have some sort of effect, or also kind of like the like loyalty programs, right? It's like an early loyalty program, just like without having a set idea about what you're going to be able to use your Groovies for. But, they had an idea that like these things may be valuable at some point. So I better, so one of the things I think that like we continue to see even today, and, AI is kind of promising to try and do better, was this thing that Pandora tried to introduce, which is like the music DNA pitch, or whatever it was, and this sense that like from you listening to the music and liking songs or playing or listening all the way through and not skipping, that the platform would begin to kind of learn what your tastes were and then could deliver more of the same to you. I remember when, to turn this into an art world analogy, when Artsy launched, Artsy's value proposition was firmly based in this idea of creating a similar type of artwork DNA database that was going to serve up the viewer more work that was similar to the things that they had liked or that they had shared or whatever it was going to be. And we know that the algorithms are these days, social media algorithms are very involved in this. And of course, even on X now, you still have the kind of the stuff that you follow and the stuff that they think is quote unquote for you. What was sort of Earbits' role there or position to play with regard to this way of, trying to mine the user's habits on the platform to give them more of what they want, versus what I think was really interesting about Earbits, which is kind of like much more of this kind of market-driven thing, which is bands and other people bidding in a kind of auction to play their music for people that are listening to the kind of artists or the kind of music that those bands feel like they are, most akin to, right? And so there's a kind of human-centered, market-driven, almost kind of more libertarian distributed model that Earbits has behind it, versus the kind of top-down engineer computer science version of what that was going to look at.
Right. So earlier you asked what were one of the first things that we did when we started the company. One of those things was pretty much waste 3 weeks of writing detailed explanation of how our algorithms will work. And I'm saying a waste of time because in reality, we realized like that was kind of like jumping a million steps ahead at that point of what we were actually like what we should have spent our time doing. So we had lots of ideas on how the algorithm will be super sophisticated and will do all those amazing things. In reality, we didn't get too far with it in terms of the sophistication. And at the end of the day, the way that it worked on Earbits was we did two things. The first one was not any musician could get their music on Earbits, and it doesn't matter how much money they're willing to pay. If their music sucked, then they wouldn't, like the editorial team wouldn't approve it. And when I say, music, any kind of art, this is very subjective, right? Like But we were judging, production quality, just kind of the basics. So trying not to be, basically not like personal taste, but just overall quality.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And then after that, again, we had a music team that part of their job was to classify the music into subgenres and as possible, we had hundreds of channels into like really small niches of I've learned a lot about different subgenres that I'd never even heard about before. And that was the way to listen to music on Earbits. You go
death metal, klezmer music.
Right, it exists.
Whatever mashup you can imagine. Yeah.
You go in there and you can pick, the niche subgenre music that you like, and then you start getting all these like different jams of like bands you've never heard about, but they're all like really high quality. And that was the discovery part of Earbits. So it wasn't learning too much. I mean, we're sure like recording all the interactions that the listener would take with the hope that one day we can become more sophisticated, but it remained pretty basic, to be frank.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think like two things we did manage to do was, if you skipped a song or thumbs down a song, you wouldn't hear that song anymore. And we would measure the performance of songs. And if they were like not getting very good results, they would be deprioritized in the playlist. And, essentially you could only buy airtime in channels that your music was already approved in. And again, if a listener skipped your song or thumbs downed it, it didn't matter how much you were paying. We weren't going to play that for that listener anymore. So really, the money aspect should not have affected like a listener's experience all that much, because they really are just, they're going to get a random selection of music from that channel. And if they don't like something, they don't have to listen to it. But they didn't have a priority to, it wasn't like we had Justin Bieber on there and Justin Timberlake and all these things to where they needed to hear these certain tracks. Like for them, one random song was as good as the next, and so it didn't matter if somebody was paying to be played or not. They were just going to get something new.
Did anybody ever try and game the platform? And I asked that only because I recently sent Joey a article about this guy who's now he's being prosecuted for fraud on the Spotify platform. But it turns out that on Spotify, he created, thousands of fake listening accounts, and then used those accounts, those bot accounts, to listen to fake bands and AI generated music that he also then created and posted on the platform. And because he owned all of those, owned all of that fake music, but basically used, AI to create the music, and then, random generators to create band names and everything to make it all look like it was kind of roughly individualized songs, and song makers like extracted something like, 1.2 or $1.9 million out of Spotify, and all basically, just taking to the extreme the way that platform works in terms of, an account costs $12 a month to open, but allows you an infinite, you can listen to music for as long as you want, as much music as you want every month for $12. And then every one of those listens goes to pay a musician some amount of money.
Yeah.
And it's a great story, but I'm curious, like, with all of these platforms, whether anybody, tried to, game the system, or was there a band that, had a trust fund baby at the head who decided that they were just gonna, pay for, every channel that they possibly could and just dominate the AdWords model to show up in everyone's feed all the time?
Yeah. So first of all, I always find it funny with like people who do these kind of things, like how creative it is to like come up with this scheme, right? Like just imagine if you use that talent to actually build something, something
of work.
value.
It was like. Yeah. The article, this article was Matt Levine and Money Stuff in Bloomberg. He's like, it's a lot of work. This guy really did a lot of work. Maybe you should earned his earned his money. And then also given the amount of money that Spotify is taking in every month, it's like this guy, is just taking a tiny little skim off the top for all that work.
But yeah, I think we were too small for anyone to try to game it. I mean, we had bands who were just finding great value in the airtime that they were buying, and just like, our problem was actually, it's funny because when we started the company, I was a bit concerned about this whole business model. Being a musician, I was like, really? Like, we're going to ask musicians to pay to play their music? That sounds kind of off in a way. And for a long time, since when we started, basically the model was it's a freemium for the bands. Like, you can get your music into rotation, but at some point, and I think we also felt pressure from our investors to demonstrate that bands would actually pay to get extra rotation and all the bells and whistles. So we decided to find out if bands would pay for it. So I reached out to the bands that we had on board and said, hey, we're going to run this like beta of like offering like premium airtime. Reach out if you're interested. And my inbox exploded. Like, I was shocked. And yeah, the problem was not to get bands to pay for airtime. The challenge was to deliver the airtime as quick as possible, like basically getting more listeners. That was the challenging part. And yeah, it's funny because before we started, we didn't even think that that's going to be an issue at all. I remember we would meet with investors. They all ask us the same question: how are you going to get listeners? And we were so naive. We were like just kind of like smirking and like, man, like online radio, no commercials, no ads. You can skip, you can do whatever you want. Great music. Like, getting listeners is not going to be an issue. We were wrong. It was very difficult.
We did have one band in that beta program who bought multiple airtime packages, and then at some point we realized we were undercharging for, on a per stream basis for the service. We were like, we don't have enough inventory, so to speak, to fulfill all this. All the bands were like, we had like a 68% renewal rate, so we knew that that bands were getting tons and tons of value out of it, and we're happy to pay for it, but we just didn't have enough airtime to deliver. So we decided we were going to raise the prices. And we sent out an email saying, hey, the beta program is kind of coming to an end. We're going to raise prices from like 1 cent per stream to 3 cents or whatever it was. And this one guy who had already bought like 3 or 4 campaigns, who luckily we had managed to deliver all of his airtime for him, like reached out, was like, come on, let me buy like one last package, like under the original price. And we're like, sure, how much do you want to buy? He's like $500, which was like, 5 times higher than anyone else had spent in a single package. But he was just like, dude, this is I'm killing it with this. Like, I yeah, I mean, so, I don't know if he had a trust fund, but certainly, threw $500 at this thing, no problem.
Yeah. So, Yotam, I think it's interesting you mentioned that, like, there are a lot of people who found a lot of value in this, both labels and bands and performers. But you also mentioned that, like, you as a musician, you have kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, negative reaction to the pay-to-play model, right? And I think that there's a long history of that going back in the United States, from payola in the 1930s through, even up into the early 2000s, when a lot of this was still being sort of, tossed around. And people like Clear Channel and things like that were sort of coming under investigation at the time. What, who were the biggest critics, and where did you get the biggest negative reaction? What do you think drove that negative reaction?
I think I know why Joey's smiling. Let's see if I guess correctly. I think overall, the reaction was extremely positive. We got reviews and just like from bands and record labels, like, all of it was extremely positive, except the president of what was it, Joey?
It's called A2IM. It was the American Association of Independent Music, which represents indie labels.
Is that what you had in mind, Joey, when you were smiling? Yes. Or something else? Yeah, okay. Yes, I don't remember what was his beef. I think, hey, look at this business. They're not paying royalties to the artists. It's unfair. It's blah, 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 blah. Completely ignoring the fact that the outcome that we're delivering to these bands outweighs the royalties that we're not paying. So yeah, if you get your music on Spotify, you'll get a 0.0000003 cents per stream. Good luck making a real income from that. You get your music on Earbits and you pay $20 to get extra exposure, and you turn that into $60 of sales of your merch and albums. Which one do you prefer? Right. But yeah, he was just looking at it black and white. Royalties, no royalties, good, bad. That's it. And he was unreasonable. Like, there was just no way to reason with him. And that was annoying. Yeah, but whatever.
Yeah, I
And so,
think, we definitely had like the occasional label who would, say that they didn't like the idea or the model or whatever, and just would like, not play ball. But everybody who tried the platform became an advocate. Everybody who actually used it was like, oh, wow, this is like crazy. I mean, we were doing things that like nobody's really done, right? Like if somebody said they wanted to join the band's mailing list, we actually gave their email address to the band or to their label. I mean, most people try to like keep that data within their own ecosystem, right? They would have built a tool where you could message the people who had become fans on Earbits, but you would have to do it through the Earbits platform. And if you stopped paying, you wouldn't have access to those email addresses anymore, or some other like, closed ecosystem stuff. We were like, no, I mean, like we knew what bands wanted. They wanted email addresses. And so we would just give them the email address, and you would be opting in and agreeing that we're going to share the email address with you. So there was just all kinds of reasons why the value people got out of what we were doing was so much higher than a fraction of a cent in royalties. But, these guys, I think the industry had just basically won the right to get any royalties for certain types of performances on internet radio. They've been like fighting for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years to get royalties on internet radio. They finally won. And then we sort of entered the scene saying, not only are we not going to pay royalties, but ultimately you're going to end up paying us to put your music on the radio more often. And so this organization, they actually did some conniving stuff. Like so we were sending these outreach emails, basically telling people, you should sign up with us and give us your music. Here's 2 labels that were very reputable that have agreed to work with us, and you should work with us too. So first they went to those 2 labels and talked them into pulling their music. And once the labels had pulled their music, then they sent a big blast to all of their label partners saying that we were lying in our email and that those labels were not working with us. And we ended up in a call with these guys trying to convince them. They posted a blog post, totally defaming us and acting like we were liars. I remember Yotam was like so mad, when somebody like questions your integrity, especially when they're totally wrong or lying about it. I mean, it was just infuriating. So we ended up on a call with these guys and we just said, listen, we're not asking you to support what we're doing. We're just asking you to correct the record on your post. You're basically lying. And he was like, I'll change the record when you guys start paying royalties. And I think it's the only business call I've ever ended by telling the person to go fuck themselves.
And it's pretty funny too, because it's like also, I think now Spotify and there are other places that you can basically purchase sponsored plays. Right? Like the model is still out there and still active.
The reality is, even when we were doing this, so what happened was payola was this big scandal and you weren't allowed to pay to have music on the radio anymore. What happened was these other businesses popped up that would curate playlists for radio. So They would so the radio station could stop paying some person, some director,
A&R person, yeah.
So they would they wouldn't have to pay this person anymore to like curate playlists and figure out what they were going to play. They would buy a pre-made playlist of what was hot and popular from these companies. And there was nothing stopping the record labels from paying those companies. Like you couldn't pay Clear Channel directly to get on the radio, but you could definitely pay this company to prioritize your artists and their playlists. And then they would sell that playlist to, I mean, they might have even given those playlists to the record labels.
Right. They just hammer away at the record labels, right?
Yeah, because they're getting their money from somewhere else. And for the radio stations, it was eliminated a job that they didn't have to pay anymore. So they get free playlists. The radio stations, these other companies start making money. And meanwhile, the record labels are still completely dominating the airwaves by paying for play. So it's like to pretend like it wasn't happening is just ludicrous.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that, we've seen it, these transformations in these various, kinds of media. Even today, you've got these like magazine brands or media brands that are basically like 100% advertorial, right? Like Cultured Magazine is a great example of it, which is like, profiles of people, and it's essentially 100% pay to play, right? It's like it's run by a sort of PR firm. And it's great, it's got a certain style, certain aesthetic. There's only so much they can put on there. There's a price to it, but it's like all of these, Artsy has their whole advertorial section. Everyone has their sort of like paid content sections, realizing that, the advertising model is one model, the paid content section is another model. And it's like, and subscription is the other side of that coin. And there's only so many combinations of these things that you can put together, depending on what kind of things you're trying to offer a public. And the fact is that in a lot of these artistic communities, but the desire for visibility and the desire for recognition is very high. And it's not about exploiting people, but it's like if you can create a platform that provides good visibility, proven recognition, delivery of email addresses, contacts, and community for a reasonable price, that's something that people are definitely going to pay for. Talk to me about the sort of the final stretch of Earbits, which I know some of this from Joy, but I'm curious to hear from your side too, Yotam.
Yeah, sure.
At what point did you have the kind of heart to heart with Joey? We're like, listen, we can't raise the more money, or we're not getting the users that we need. Like we're running up against these signals that are telling us that there are a few options left. What was the tenor of those conversations, and was there an event that precipitated that in a kind of crystallized moment?
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly. I think it was sort of mid 2014. At the time, we're streaming about 2 million songs every month, had 15,000 bands on board, 700 record labels, pretty good growth, but not that type of growth, the exponential hockey stick type of growth that would allow a company, a startup, to go to a VC and raise an A round. Joey was still trying to chase, smaller like angel checks. At that point, we've raised a total of 1.7 million. We had some money in the bank, about probably nearly 9 months of runway or something like that. But I think it became quite clear that we won't be able to raise the next round.
Yeah.
And we cannot forever continue like raising a seed round. Like you can't just like spend 10 years raising a seed round.
Do you remember, Joey, do you remember what your burn at that point was? Do you remember what the burn rate of the company was?
I don't think it was ever.
It wasn't too high. It was like maybe anywhere from 20 to 30.
We had like 15 employees, but most of them, like 7 or 8 of them, were part-time musicians that just categorize music and stuff like that. It was a really low burn, but we never had more than 8 months of runway in the bank ever. The entire journey of the company. Probably the most money we ever put away was right after demo day. We put like $700,000 in the bank. That still was only probably 8 months of runway. And then, we were just always just like trying to keep that amount in the bank, sort of endlessly.
Yep.
So I think, at that point we realized, well, we're not going to be able to raise more money. We need to figure out plan B. And realized that the best option would be to try to get acquired, basically. And once we made that decision, that kind of helped us put a strategy together, reduce the headcount. We're like, okay, we're not going to try to build new features and spend money on that. We're going to spend the next 6 to 9 months trying to get acquired, which is exactly what we did. We kind of like searched the market, found a few interesting parties, including Pandora actually, and ran the whole process. Meanwhile, time is passing, runway is getting shorter. Some of the conversations turn into a no. Finally, we're like down to, a couple of them, Pandora included. We, meeting with their CFO and the executive team. That turned into a no. And we're running out of options and money. And now, we're like, okay, well, just some weeks away from like running out of money. What do we do now if we're unable to sell the company? And at that point, we started talking about, okay, well, now let's talk about shutting down the company. So that's exactly what we were doing. We're planning to shut down the company. Me personally, I started thinking about what's next for me, which at that point, I decided to move to Colombia. At the time, my wife was still living in Colombia. I was like, I'll go there. I'll spend a few months, teach myself how to code. It's going to be fun. So I started packing my stuff, and we sent out an email to all our bands and listeners, basically telling them that on whatever date the platform will be turned off. And as I'm packing my boxes, literally like putting the tape on the boxes, Joey storms into my room and seemed very excited, which was something I haven't seen in a while, considering the situation. And like, dude, I'm on the phone with this, like he's muted the phone. It's like this company from Atlanta, they want to buy us. like what are you talking about? Anyways, that turned to be true. Like a week later, we were on a plane to Atlanta. And I mean, it was a crazy, like anything related to Earbits was kind of nuts, just crazy. But eventually they acquired us. And yeah, after that, I stayed another 2 years under the company that acquired us. And then finally, in the end of 2016, after 6 years, I was like, okay, it's time to move on.
Nice. What was your, during that 2 year period where you were working underneath the auspice of the new company, what was your feeling about, I'm sure you're pleased to have been acquired so the company didn't shut down, but what was it like to sort of, work on this thing that you had created now in some sense belonged to somebody else and had a different tenor to it?
It's difficult. I mean, there are pros and cons, of course. Like all of a sudden, okay, it's not a startup anymore. I actually know that I'm gonna get a salary,
Right. Yeah.
Twice a month, and it's actually a more meaningful salary, which is nice. And there's so a lot more comfortable. We had like a good budget to continue building what we started. But yeah, it's not ours anymore. And the final say, it's not yours anymore. It's like, okay, well, what the company that acquired us, they get the final say, which is it can be frustrating, and it was at times. So for me, it was a combination of both. Like I enjoyed that time. It was fun, allowed us to do a lot of things that we couldn't do before that. But at the same time, it was also like, okay, well, it's not my baby anymore.
Now, this is some time ago, so I'm curious, I know it's perhaps you haven't followed the kind of the streaming industry as closely as you might have been, when you were sort of deeply involved with Earbits. But I'm curious from your perspective, given this sort of deep engagement in it for that 6 year period, if not more, having been involved in the music industry for a long time. Is there anything on the horizon now or that you've been experiencing now that you think is interesting, or does it seem like it's in a phase of kind of stagnation in terms of, Spotify's kind of dominance of the field and the question of, how do smaller bands, get out and get themselves known? It seems like a lot of the same problems that you were trying to tackle a decade ago are probably a lot of the same problems that still exist in a kind of platform-driven music economy. So I'm curious from your standpoint if if there's seen any big changes, or if it seems like it's still a kind of a similar environment.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm not connected anymore to that world or closely anymore. So it's hard for me to judge, but I really do wonder how do bands, get their name out there and make a living from making music, right? Because like, again, Spotify, anyone like getting on Spotify is not a problem. Like making money out of it is incredibly difficult. There are very few, like percentage wise, very few artists who
Right.
make a good income from streaming services. I think artists, and it's probably a problem that has been, a problem for artists forever. Like, I don't think, there wasn't a time where artists found it easy to, to make a living from their art. So it will probably continue to be the same case where artists have to continue to innovate and sort of like hack the system, find out how to break out, right? Like, you see artists who broke out on YouTube in the early days by doing really creative stuff, right? And yeah, so I don't think the platform is not going to save anyone. That any platform is not going to save anyone, because there are more artists out there than, like, you still have to break through the noise. There's always going to be noise, and that's the tough part. But I think that also creates a lot of creativity, or forces artists to do things that are really creative.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of this is these are all sort of problems that take place on kind of the open or the clear web, as they say. And I know there's a kind of movement over the last few years of artists and other people who are working in kind of content creation to try and work within these somewhat more closed ecosystems, right? Communities around, invite only Discord servers or, email newsletters that are sort of relatively sort of like closed communities or text networks, right? Like, WhatsApp groups and things like that you have to be invited to join. And so there's some kind of marker or validation that has to take place in advance, usually through sort of peer-to-peer recognition that then allows for these kind of smaller economies to work. And I almost equate that going back to the days of like, regional scenes, right? I mean, if like you lived in Indianapolis in the teens, like there's only so many bands that you're going to be able to see, only so much live music that's going to be around, you know what I mean? Or even in the 1960s, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and these things created their own sort of scale in the opposite direction, right? Like a new economy of the smaller scale.
It's funny because I think for me, I don't know if it is related or not, but actually as we were building Earbits and as music became sort of like turn on the tap and get as much as you want, my personal interest in music actually has decreased.
Interesting.
Yeah, because there's so much out available that it becomes like, I don't know. It's like sometimes if you go to like an open buffet and you're like, you don't feel hungry anymore because there's too much food in front of you. In a way,
choice fatigue, right?
Yeah, I feel, I almost miss the days as a kid where I had my music collection that I cherished and I would listen to the same records over and over again, but like, and I was excited about like trying to discover the next album or whatever it is. It wasn't easy, but it was, I think it meant more, at least to me.
Yeah. Interesting. Joey, are we going to do go for it.
We are going to do more opinion segment too, but I have like at least two questions for you, Yotam. So like for at least 4 years, I would say after Earbits, I was pretty adamant that if somebody gave me $5 million to try it again, that I would still do it because I think that it worked. And I think I learned enough from doing it the first time that I don't have to repeat those mistakes. And I think that we could actually have built something really successful if we had been given a second chance to do that. I'm curious, forgetting whether you personally have the stomach to build another startup like that, do you think there is space for an Earbits to launch now, 2024, and find success?
Yes, I do. I actually, as we were talking about all those things and like how it worked and like the kind of like it sort of reminded me of all the things that we validated that worked really, really well. So yeah, I definitely do think that there's a need for it and that it can work. If someone gave me $5 million right after we did Earbits and asked me the same question, I would probably spend $4 million on therapy and the other $1 million on trying to do it again.
Totally.
Well, if you had 5 million, would you launch Earbits again now? Mobile first Earbits? If you had a 5 million in the bank right now from an investor?
Me personally, I don't think I have it in me to. I mean, it's so taxing to build a startup. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not sure if I mean. It's a harder question than whether I think that I think that the Spotify was not the behemoth then that it is now, and it was already hard to change people's listening habits when they were like mostly dealing with commercials, and like back then it's like everybody hated commercials on Pandora, they hated commercials on Spotify. The subscription side of Spotify hadn't taken off nearly as ubiquitously as it has now, so it's just sort of like. Now, though, people are so comfortable paying whatever it is, $10 a month, like they've just got an endless smorgasbord of music. I think changing their listening habits would be a little more difficult now than it was.
And that's the thing. I think we were a little bit toying with the idea back then about the service not being the destination, but basically kind of like a funnel to then service the music on Pandora or whatever other, like basically you come to Earbits to buy the airtime, then we get you distribution on these other channels that will, and then, but the challenge was like, well, how do we then turn that into actual like exposure that you can monetize? That was the challenging part. So yeah, I think if I were to do it again, it won't be about like trying to build a destination where people like and trying to compete with Spotify. It would have to be creative, in a creative way, providing the distribution, but then also delivering actual value to the bands.
Yeah.
Okay, my other question for you, Thomas, what is your most fun memory from building Earbits?
I there's so many, but I think one of the most memorable one of kind of like a high was that time that what's his name?
Conway?
Ron Conway walked into the room at YC completely by surprise and handed over 150,000 check to every company in the batch. Yeah, that was just insane.
Yeah. The following year, they formalized it. They created something called the Start Fund, which then promised extra funding to every company that was NYC. And then, a few years later, they stopped doing it. But we were the first batch that happened. So Paul Graham was like, listen, I don't want to take up your guys' Friday night unnecessarily. I promise you will not be disappointed. I need you all to come to the YC offices on Friday night, and we're going to have a special guest. And everybody was like, is it Barack Obama? Is it Bill Gates? Who's going to be the special guest that's so important that, they would bring us all back to the office. And then they brought in Ron Conway, who's, called the godfather of Silicon Valley. He's invested in, some of the most famous startups that have ever come out of the Valley, and incredibly amazing investor and his group. Anyways, they said, Ron believes so much in our selection process and what we're doing that he's going to invest $150,000 into every company sight unseen. Everybody here gets $150K.
Yeah. 3 days later, I remember walking to the bank with a 150,000 check in my hand. I was I was shaking. I was like, what did I do with this thing?
Yeah, it was pretty good. To their credit, I really didn't think we would get any support from them because they had no idea what we did. But SV Angel, which is his investment group, I mean, they really treated us so unbelievably well. And anytime you emailed them with a reasonable ask, whether it was an introduction or this or whatever. I mean, and in fact, I have two people who worked at that firm who no longer do, who even within Virgin Art, I've emailed them a couple times asking for intros or whatever else. And even to this day, they're 100% totally supportive, unbelievably nice people. Shall we do more opinions segment?
Absolutely.
You want to do it, Jonathan? Or?
No, you go for it.
All right. So, Yotam, we almost asked this, but we didn't. So, the first part of the it's the MO podcast. So I got to plug MO, more opinions. If somebody gave you $10 million on which to embark on some kind of a new project or enterprise, what would you build? What would you do with 10 million? And it can't just go into your YC fund.
Yeah, or therapy.
Yeah, sure. I think it would be related to climate tech or something like that. I feel that's the top priority right now. So what in particular, I don't know, but anything that can help us overcome the climate crisis.
Just take the whole pile of money and compost it? No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
Okay, we won't dive into more specifics. We tend to put people under the gun with these questions, so we won't ask.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried here.
The second question is, and this is the one we do warn people about, and I shot you a note earlier about this, but what's another project or person in the creative sector that you admire what they're doing or just think is cool?
Yeah, so despite the note and the warning, and that's a tough question for me. Yeah, I really don't know. What I do know is that I'm drawn much more to, when it comes to music, to the real and more authentic stuff. So for me, it's a lot more exciting to listen to someone who plays an acoustic instrument, and it might be a really simple production, and it's just demonstrating the raw art of making music, as opposed to, it's not to diminish anything from other types of highly produced music or whatnot, but I feel like that I get most excited by just a really nice sounding instrument played by a really great musician.
When you say that, is there somebody in your head? Do you hear what?
Yeah, I don't know. I do have someone in mind, but whatever. Avishai Cohen, he's an Israeli bass player, a very well-known jazz musician, and yeah, I really do enjoy listening to him.
Wow, bass player, never would have. That's surprising for everybody. Third and final question: if you could steal any work of art from around the world and have it for yourself to enjoy, but not be able to share it with anybody else, what piece of art would you like to have for yourself?
I think
we can expand that to cultural artifact.
You've got.
Do you see what's on?
No, you're
it's blurred background.
Blurred. Yeah. It's the Van Gogh photo of the bridge, the painting of the bridge.
Sure.
I've had this painting, the same painting in my room since I was a child. And yeah, moved with me across the world. And yeah, I guess I just feel connected to that painting. So I think it's going to cost a little bit of money, right?
I mean, in this case, you're stealing it, so we don't have to worry about that too much.
Oh, I'm stealing it. Okay, yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that's pretty interesting endorsement. I mean, like, you have a piece of art that you've literally been living with for decades. Like, I've had art that I bought, but then after 10 years passed, I was like, kind of like, I don't know if I need this in my new apartment. So nice that you have a piece that you find companionship with. All right. Well, we're wrapping up another episode of the MO podcast. Yotam, thanks for coming on, chatting with us. That was fun.
Thank you. It was fun. Yeah.
Jonathan, thanks as always for co-hosting with me.
I have to say I'm eminently disappointed, Yotam, that we didn't get more good dirt on Joey during this podcast. But I guess I'll have to wait till more off the record environments to actually get that. You're obviously a very good friend.
It's because I've already willingly confessed all my dirt to you already. So I don't think there's anything I've done that's embarrassing.
No, it's great. It's great to have all the stories validated. At least Joey's not the fabulous that you can take him to be.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks,
Yotam.
Tom.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, guys.